the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast, hosted by 360 Energy. In part 2 of our series of the importance of data management, we talk about the latest technology, who should be involved in mining the data, and how much you should invest in the process. Welcome back, Dave and John. Last week we touched on data quite a bit. We will be going more in depth on the ins and outs of data management to help assist organizations aiming to meet their targeted energy and carbon goals. In episode 3, we talked about energy and carbon targets and how it is important to understand your organization consumption first. Something you both mentioned was not rushing to buy the latest equipment and to really analyze your existing situation. Why is it important to start with existing data first? This is something you both have already integrated in our conversation already, but I was hoping to get a more direct answer for our listeners.
Okay, I'll take a swing at this one. If we're talking about energy and meters, here's the thing. A meter does not save energy. It costs you money and it does not save energy. In the old days, it cost you even more because you had to pay somebody to go and read it. At least today, we can use automated reading. But you know, it's you don't know what you need until you've started analysing what you've got, and that's why you don't rush in to buying technology. That said, at some point, don't get us wrong. Technology is right and is something that you should be using, but you should use the right technology in the right place at the right time.
I know it's true. We know, John, a lot of people put meters in and the data that's collected is not really used or understood by many people within the organization too.
Yeah.
It seems like a time investment on the organization's end with many steps to gather the data portion of the energy strategy. What does it cost to have energy and carbon data evaluated? What are some avenues organizations can take to get this work done?
So we've talked about this in earlier broadcasts, Sandra, that you really have to have a good understanding of your total spend. And then by doing that, you could figure out how much time and money you use to manage that properly. So if you're spending $1 million, how much time and effort should you spend on that? You know, we've addressed that utility bills or metering data, there is a time and there's a cost associated with it. So I'll take a tack at the utility bills because we've done studies and work for organizations to actually investigate this. And depending on the carrier or the service provider that you're working with, and information they're extracting from the bill, because there are people that actually they extract the utility bill, but they only use it to pay the utility bill, not to do anything on energy management. So what we have found in the marketplace for customers, for someone to go and get the bill and collect it and analyze, like it could be $4 to $8 per bill, and that's just getting the bill and taking the data out, not analyzing it and coming up with a strategy of what to do. So there is a cost incurred that you have to be aware of, and so you want to go there with open eyes. That is a real cost. But you know, if we haven't stressed this earlier, like it's a starting point. You can't manage energy without this information. There will be a cost and it will vary depending on what you're going to capture, the frequency of what you're going to capture. So you have to go with open eyes. But I'm going to say to all the people that it will make good business sense, whether you do it internally or you put a kit in, as John said, at the site. It will make sense, but you need to understand the business case behind it.
I think one of the things, and it's just jumping well ahead, but you know, if you're looking at things like sub-metering, one of the things is if you're having a refurbishment or a new piece of plant installed, actually adding a meter to that, you probably won't even notice it in that budget. So there are things like that to do. And I think the other approach is you've got to accept that you have to spend some money on this, because it's quite funny. We don't ever talk about how much it costs for the accounting department to run and the computers that they've got and everything else, because people go, well, you've got to do that. That's part of business. And what we're looking at a part of business that may be 1, 2, 10% of the operating costs of the business, who knows, and nothing is being spent on capturing that information. I think as well, I think you could be sucked into spending a fortune right at the front end. We would say, no, you've got to understand what it is. Simple approach. If you've got an energy spend, energy management per se, doing it all better, could save you. Some people say, oh, 10, 15, 20%. Let's assume it saves you 5%. Okay, so knowing what you're using could save you 5%. You could then from that say, would it be worth 1% to get that 5%, a 5-to-1 payback? You could look at it that way and could set yourself a budget and say, okay, we don't know what we can do, but could we spend 1% of our energy bill on getting to understand it better? Don't run away with that as an idea, but it's a way of thinking about it.
It's a really very important point. From our experience, literally capturing that information, making everyone aware that that information is being captured and will be used to drive accountability. Just that thought process and continually to reinforce that within the organization, there is 5% savings that all of a sudden magically happen because all of a sudden people realize, uh-oh, they're going to start seeing things that maybe they didn't see before, and now I got to start. And that just means that's waste, because a lot of energy can be wasted because it's not being tracked. And so as soon as people know it's being tracked and understood and accountabilities are going to be made in place, we find automatically 5% savings magically happens. And it's not just the first year and it goes away. It's continual. It keeps on climbing and climbing as the knowledge within the organization improves on what the information is and how to use it.
And here's the thing, if you're not collecting the data, you don't know whether that 5% is being achieved or ongoing. You need the data, in fact, to lock in those savings. So that's another benefit that collecting and effectively utilizing data. We once had a thing that's saying you start with data, you turn data into information, the information becomes knowledge. Armed with that knowledge, somebody does something that then changes how much energy is used. So you come back to the beginning, that changes the data, and you go through the loop again.
And just to bring everything together, if we've been saying that we're focusing on energy, but energy is really carbon, it's really GHG. So yeah, once this is done and done consistently and done well, again, magically carbon reduction happens within the organization with not a lot of expense, by the way. It's just knowledge base that a lot of this happens within the organization.
We're mentioning a lot of work that needs to be done. So I just want to go back to the question I asked. So what are some avenues organizations can take to make this happen? Is it hiring people on site, hiring a third party? How does this work?
I'll take a kick at this. Senator, I believe it should be a multidiscipline thought process that should be brought to the table. I think accounting or financial people should be involved because they actually are getting some of this data. I think operations people should be involved because most of the time what they do impacts the amount of data or amount of energy being used and when it's being used. I think maintenance people should be involved because they tend to be the MacGyvers and know where there's areas of trouble points or bottlenecks or things of that nature. I think people on the line that have an interest in the passion can be involved. This is not a one person or one department scenario because it touches everyone, and they will need this information in not only what their current status is, but going forward. But my recommendation is it should be a multidisciplined approach to actually start this process. John, you want to?
Yeah, I think you're right there. It needs to be multidisciplined. Equally, and I think something that Lysandra's trying to get us to talk about is you can employ consultants and bureaus and agencies and people outside. I think all of that is good. But what you've got to do, in fact, you've got to have a blended result. And the blended result is quite simply, you do not want to subcontract all of this and all the elements of it and not have ownership of it as an organisation. On the other hand, if you try to do all of it internally with your existing systems, you may well find you haven't got the capacity. So there is the starting point, and there's no argument about this because this is where we're coming from. The starting point is the multidisciplinary team and having them educated.
Yeah, and I touched upon this before, that there is certainly parties out there that say they're doing this for you. There's a variety of organizations that will actually pay utility bills for customers, and they say they capture data. But from our experience, they're limited in what they're capturing. They're using it for paying bills. They're not using it for procurement or for optimization or energy efficiency. It's really important, whoever you deal with who are involved, understand that you should be looking at a multifaceted approach on energy and as it relates to carbon. So I'd like to stress that what John was saying.
It's great to hear the options organizations have to get their data management system ready. To end this episode off, with a lot of time and money invested in the data analysis of energy and carbon, overall, how can this data analysis and management system be used in an organization? Are there any specific examples of situations you've seen working in an organization that you think would be of value to our listeners?
Oh, end on the difficult one.
Gotta leave them with something to think about.
Yeah.
I think the point of it is, if we look at the people who are absolute leaders, and I'm going to go slightly beyond, if we look at the people who are absolute leaders in sustainability, and that's the level above energy, carbon, environment, sustainability. If you have a look at the people who are doing that, all of them somewhere have, if you like, a data engine that is driving that. And I think quite simply, if you want to be excellent in today's world and you are not getting to grips with your energy, carbon and other data, then you're not going to be in the top league.
It is the foundation of managing energy. You can't do anything on energy or do anything well on energy unless you have access to this data and that the data is actually understood and it's actually used to execute and implement and verify that you've done. If that is not done, because I've seen it where people collect data and then it just stays in a vault, no one else sees it. It's got to be used in decision making and understood, and that is a must. And it will be a must for the carbon. If we're going to change how we do things in this world on carbon, you have to have energy data, and you have to use that data in your decision making to figure out where you are and then verify what impacts you've had by making those changes. Critical piece.
On that note, this is a great point to conclude this week's episode. I definitely learned a lot, and I think our listeners did as well. Thank you both for your time today, Dave and John. I look forward to talking to you next week.
Looking forward to it.
Look forward to it as well,
Thank you.
Sandra. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune into our podcast on Apple Music and Spotify by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. See you next week.